up and running for us, so it is good to have you here tonight. I know even the people who haven't been able to be here in person have been talking about this, and a couple of people have said, wow, there really ought to be a movie about David. And I'm like, I know, but I don't know that some of it I'd care to see. It's kind of horrific. I watched, I don't know if any of you have seen the movie Paul. They did a movie on Paul a few years ago, and it was kind of done in the time frame of when he was in prison and was talking with Luke a lot, but it was brutal. I mean, Christians being burned at the stake, and lighting up the light posts of the city, and it was almost more than I could take. I'm like, oh, I mean, I know that's really what happened in that time period, but to see it, in a movie, and it was right, and actually the movie ended with Paul being beheaded, coming to his death. And so it was a tough movie to watch. I will never watch it again. To be honest. Yes, it does. It absolutely does. And that's why we need to definitely lift up our brothers and sisters in Christ, in other areas who, we think we're being persecuted here in America, but no, not compared to what they are facing, in other places. It's horrific. It really is. And to sit and watch that and to think that even in America, we have to hold on to this and pray for our nation, because we so easily could be there and so dangerously could be there, because, Satan is still the prince and the power of this earth, and turning people against each other and so on. It's really sad, but so when I thought about that movie and I thought about David, I'm like, I don't think I want to see this in movie form. But it's definitely an adventure, to look at the life of David and some of the things he's encountered. And yet, more than anything for me, to look at his heart and to see somebody who made mistakes, the way, he came back to God and God forgave and renewed. And we're going to look at some of that tonight, once again, kind of a mistake on David's part, and yet we're going to see God return his joy to him and restore that relationship. But before we get into that, let's go to the Lord in prayer this evening. Lord, we come to you humble, and Lord, wanting to hear what you have to say to us tonight. And even as we look at David and we look at his life, humbleness was such a huge part of it. And anytime he became, too big in himself and kind of moved forward without you, it was a return to that place of humbleness at your feet. And I pray, Lord, that we would be found there this evening, humble at your feet, ready to hear from your word. I pray, dear Lord, for our church. I pray for those in our church who are hurting, those who are grieving losses. Lord, whether they're very new and very fresh, or the ones that just seem like the ache is just still there and it'll never go away. Lord, I pray that you would be their comfort, be there for them, be through the storm with them, and bring them into the peace and the calm. Lord, I pray that even as we look tonight, that you will turn their lament, their grief, into joy, into dancing. Show them the God that you are. I pray, Lord, for our nation. I pray that you would be with our nation's leaders, the many things going on here, not just in America, but around the world. It all just seems so overwhelming, and I just thank you and praise you that you are the God who is still over it all, and that we can put our faith and our trust in you. But in the meantime, I pray, Lord, that you would just still have your hand on these ones here, these leaders in America, and I just pray that you would help us as believers to do our part, to remain the church, even in the midst of all of the chaos and all of the turmoil. I thank you for the God you are. I thank you for those who are here tonight. I pray that you would bless them. I thank you for all who may be watching, whether it be now or at another time. Lord, be with them. Lift them up. I thank you for who you are. In your holy name I pray. Amen. Okay, so tonight we are not going to look at a huge passage in the Psalms. This event, actually, we could probably look at 5 or 6 different Psalms that actually a little passage here and a little passage here kind of are areas where you can find David talking about this, but we're not going to jump all over in the Psalms. We will look at one and kind of focus heavily on that, because if there's anything I want you to take away from it, it's that part of it. But we are starting off in 2 Samuel 6, Now, last week we talked about David fully becoming king, not just over Judah, but over all of Israel as well. And now the civil war between that area has ended, and everyone has come together. They've joined together under David as king. And we see that quickly, enemies rise up. Those Philistines did not go away. And we see a couple of different battles that came upon them. And as we know, it was because the Philistines feared David now as king, and suddenly he would grow too powerful and his army's too big, and the Philistines wanted to stop this before it happened. So we see one attempt, and we know that David consulted the Lord, and the Lord said, "Go, I will hand them over to you." And I think my favorite part was the second attempt on the Philistines, when God said, "Yeah, but don't go up with them face to face." And God kind of orchestrated something supernatural, something only God could do. And God did something in the tops of the trees. I don't know what exactly they heard or what exactly happened. But I love the fact that the Lord said, "When you hear that, know that I have gone out before you." And we have a God who is going to take the lead. We don't have a God that's walking behind us. We have one that says, "Wait on me, trust in me, and let me go before you. And I'll take care of those things that you face in life." That's the God we serve. So that's where chapter 5 ends. And then in chapter 6, it picks up that David wants to restore the place of worship to Jerusalem. Now understand, he has now, taken back Jerusalem. If you recall, when he became king, they didn't really have the territory. The enemy had moved in and taken over Jerusalem. And David said, "It's time for us to take this back." And David had gone and with his armies and had taken through the waterways and through all that and had taken Jerusalem back. And now he's wanting to bring the Ark of the Covenant back into that city. He's wanting to restore the place of worship there. It had been held over, I believe, Gibeon, and I'm going to say the wrong place. I think I'm correct there. But anyways, it was in another place, and he said, "I'm ready to bring it back. We need to bring everything back to Jerusalem, to the city of David." And he was ready to restore this. David was energetic and full of life, and he wanted to do so much to please God. He wanted to build a temple for it. He just had all these great big plans. And no one could maybe fault David for all of his vision and all of his excitement. I mean, we would all say we would want a leader with vision and energy and excitement. But this story kind of takes all that energy and all that excitement and all that zeal and everything, and it kind of pulls it back in and says, but make sure that even when you're that way, that you're aligning yourself with God. Because it can be easy for all of that vision and all of that excitement to get us carried away, and suddenly we're off course. And we're going to see a little bit of that happening as we kind of break down through this. Maybe we won't be here as long tonight. It's a shorter chapter. I can say that. We'll see. Anyways, so in verse 1 of 2 Samuel chapter 6, it said, "David again assembled all the fit young men in Israel, 30,000. Now, can you imagine 30,000 fit young men, and David calls them all together. He brings, I just want you to stop and think, this is not a little group. This is 30,000 young men. And can you imagine the rally here? And they're thinking, are we going to battle? What are we doing, David? David's the warrior king. But David had another plan this day. David goes, no, we've got a job to do. And I can imagine this was a rally where he's building them up on the importance of what they're going to do, the holy thing they're going to do. They're going to restore the ark to Jerusalem. And so now here goes 30,000 fit young men along with David. So it says in verse 2, he and all of his troops set out to bring the ark of God from Baale-Judah. The ark bears the name of the Lord of armies, who is enthroned between the cherubim. So that was their job. Here he is. He's rallied all these men together. We are going to go get the ark of God. Now, this ark was something that primarily would have been in some place of worship. And, as custom would be, And as they were told to do, their prayers would go down between the cherubims and so on. And this is where they would put up their prayers, their requests, and seek counsel from the Lord. So the fact that they didn't have this in their area, that they didn't have this in their city, they didn't have this in some, temporary, temple, it was of great loss to them. And David was ready to restore this. And so here they go to bring it back home. This was their job. So, here it begins. They go, they get there. This is not a battle. This is not a war. We're not talking battles or wars. It says they set the ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house, which was on the hill. Uzzah and Ahio, however you say that one, sons of Abinadab, were guarding the cart. Now, let's pause here a moment. Let's understand who we're dealing with, what we're dealing with, and why. The Ark of the Covenant had been at the home or the house or the area of Abinadab. Abinadab was one of Saul's sons, okay? And this had been at his home in this area for probably, some say 50, some say 70 years. At some point, it had been set here and, in a sense, kind of forgotten. They just left it there. That's where it was. Probably about 13 years after this, or after this ark had been here, was when we find that Saul and his sons had died. And so Abinadab was probably, now some disagree, but most agree that Abinadab was one of the sons who was killed in battle along with Saul. So now this is just kind of sitting there, and here are his, his sons, and okay, yeah, this was here, but again, now they're all in agreement that David is their king and had no qualms with David taking the ark back to Jerusalem. Like, okay, that's fine, get it out of here. I mean, it was probably neither here nor there to them at this point. And it's kind of sad that that was the case, because all reverence for this had been lost. It had been forgotten while sitting here. They had just put it from them. They had lost the importance. And I think there was a level, as David rallied up all these men to come together to get it, that David was trying to express to them the importance of having the Ark of the Covenant back with them, having the Ark of the Lord in their presence. Like, there was something holy and sacred about this. I believe with my whole heart, that's how David rallied these men. This is what we've got to go do. Why else would David care to go get it if he didn't know the importance of this? And yet, here we find them, and it says they put it on a new cart. They set it on a new cart. Well, that was their attempt to somehow make this okay. Because meaning a new cart meant that this cart had never hauled anything before. Nothing else had ever been set on it. Like somehow it was clean and only used for this purpose, and that made it okay. And yet, interestingly, the ones who would carry something like that on a cart were the Philistines. The Philistines might throw something on a cart and haul it around. But if we actually look back in the book of Numbers, we see that God clearly told the Israelites, very clearly gave them orders, that this ark was to be carried by poles. I mean, there were loops and the whole 9 yards where these poles would go, and it was to be carried by poles from this certain group of the Levitical tribe. They were to carry it on their shoulders. I mean, this was something, again, made very, very, very clear. And yet we see instantly, with all of this going on, that they set the ark of God on a new cart and transported it from Abinadab's house. The end. We don't see anything else really going on here. As a matter of fact, we just see that they say they set it on a cart. Do you know another thing that was supposed to happen? Not only was it to be carried by these poles where no one would touch it or get near it, it was also to be reverently covered. There should have been a covering put over the top of it as they hauled it away. And yet we don't see any of that. Actually, we see something very similar to how the Philistines would have taken and carried something like this. So instead of doing it the way God did it, they were kind of in a very irreverent way, doing it maybe more the way the pagans would have done it, which is very interesting here, okay? So I want to keep that all in mind as we continue reading, that there was something right from the get-go going wrong, okay? However, do I think that that's where all of their initial intentions were, where their heart was? Not necessarily. Not necessarily. I think that this was from a rather pure heart, but it says, as we continue in verse 4, they brought it with the ark of God from Abinadab's house on the hill, and Ahio walked in front of the ark. So we see the one son is walking right in front of the ark, guarding this thing. Here they all go. This is quite an entourage moving this. And then in verse 5 it says, David and the whole house of Israel were dancing before the Lord with all kinds of firwood instruments, lyres, harps, tambourines, sistrums, and cymbals. This was a parade. Like if we put ourselves on the scene of this, here's this cart and here's the ark of the Lord, and David is putting on a parade, a big one. Everybody knew what was happening. This was quite a public scene. And David was making sure that everybody knew the excitement of this. And look what we're doing. This is something holy and something good. And we're bringing the ark of the Lord back to Jerusalem. And he's just making a complete parade of this. There's music and dancing and praising going on. And you can imagine everybody's coming out to see what's happening as they're traveling. Okay? This is no little parade. I mean, I know this year it was not able to happen because of the COVID, but you can just imagine the people that show up in Newton Falls for the 4th of July. It's a big deal in this town, and there are a lot of people, but I don't think there are 30,000. I don't feel 30,000, let alone I don't think that there are 30,000 in the parade that everybody's here to see either. And yet, if we look at the size of what this was, you know, and just basically all of this excitement, all of this energy, I mean, this is exciting stuff. How could anybody be faulted for this? How could David be criticized for what is happening here? I mean, David has this vision, and he's rallied all this group together, and he, with praising and joy and everything, he is making this happen, right? That would seem to be how this goes. So if that's the idea, or if that was the concept we were holding on to, the next few verses would be completely confusing. It would be, what is happening? And there is a level of that confusion that David felt. So it says in verse 6, when they came to Nachon's threshing floor, that means near the area, near the city where they were entering, they were getting close to where they were going, okay? That's what that is symbolizing. It says when they were getting near there, when they were getting near to the city, Uzzah reached out to the ark of God and took hold of it because the oxen had stumbled. So now here's this ark, if we can visualize this. It's on this cart, and, you know, the grounds, I mean, we're not talking smooth pavement here. You know, it's rocky, I'm sure, and there are holes, and the cart kind of twists as the oxen kind of stumbles. That's pulling it. And so what's our natural reaction, right? Whoop. I mean, wouldn't we all do that? Up, stabilize it, steady it. I mean, we can all read this, and all in our human minds can say, that is exactly what I would do. I would reach out to steady it. It's rocking. So then, verse 7, with that mindset, makes no sense at all. In verse 7, then the Lord's anger burned against Uzzah, and God struck him dead on the spot for his irreverence, and he died there next to the ark of God. God was angry. I mean, this was an innocent gesture, right? He just kind of reached out to steady it. I mean, what could he have possibly done wrong in this moment? That's all he's doing, is the oxen stumbled and he just reached out to kind of catch it. Well, if we look back to where, first of all, it was not supposed to be on a cart. It was supposed to be carried reverently only by the Levitical priests and this certain group of them. It was to be covered, and they were not to touch it. They were never to touch it. And in this moment, I think for all of the joy and all of the excitement and all the energy David had, and that David had kind of gotten his men to feel, God said, I don't like the way you're doing this. Like, you have charged through, and you are doing this without me, and you have showed complete irreverence. Like, this is, you're going to do things the way I want you to do them. And when this happened, boom, God said, I'm done. You know you're not supposed to touch this. Now, I'm going to guess that probably for years in Uzzah's home with Abinadab, his father, and so on, there probably wasn't much care or reverence for that ark. It had just become something that had sat there. And so for Uzzah, did he have this thought in his head that, I'm supposed to be, reverent to this. I'm supposed to respect this. I'm supposed to fear the Lord. And this is something about God. He should have known that, but he probably didn't. And here was David with all of this energy, but, whoa, David, how are you doing this? And so God kind of woke up the whole situation. God kind of opened all of their eyes to the fact that there is something wrong happening here. When suddenly he's so angry, can you imagine all the dancing stopped? Parade was over. And any onlookers were going, oh boy, what just happened? And it stopped. And I thought on that, and I thought on that. Like, how does that relate to us? What can we learn from that? And I started thinking about the church. And, how many things do we do just because that's how we've always done it? And we just keep doing it because that's how we've always done it. And it just becomes a habit and a pattern and a whatever, and it's really not of God at all. But we're just going to keep doing it, and suddenly we lose all reverence. It just becomes so commonplace, so everyday, and we just don't think about it anymore. We've forgotten that humbleness, that reverence, that awe that we should have over our God, because it's just become what we do. And we don't really think about it as deep as we should. And I feel that to some level, that's where Uzzah, however you want to say his name, I think that's kind of where he was. Well, it was always here. It was always around. And there was no reverence for it. There was no second thought to just reaching out and grabbing a hold of it. But then I have to go over and I have to look at David's heart. Well, that's a whole nother one. Because David had energy and enthusiasm and vision. And he jumped ahead, didn't totally hold on to the respect he should have had for the things of God. Maybe with all of the best intentions, there was a way of doing things, and he didn't do it the right way. So what can we learn from that? Well, even today we can say, well, we are willing to break away from the things we've always done and the way we've always done it. And we can have all the energy and passion in the world and all the vision. And we can come up with programs and ideas and all these new things we're going to do. And we can plow ahead and yet miss the reverence. It's more about the program than about God. It's more about this new thing to catch somebody's attention. God's saying, you've forgotten about me. You've forgotten that no matter what, I have a certain way of doing things, and it's for a reason. It's for your good. But we get so caught up sometimes even in our own excitement to move forward, we forget to show God the reverence and the awe and just what he deserves because we're just moving forward our own way. And in this moment when this happened, it's funny, I talked to my son and I said, so you know the story, right? Mm-hmm. And I said, so what do you think about that? I think what any human being would possibly think. I think what they would think. I said, which is what? That it's kind of unfair. And it's hard not to read this and think, but really, God, you had to strike him dead? I mean, I don't think my son was wrong. I'm like, yeah, that is what every human being would probably think is, wow, that seems harsh. Who is this God that would come on, maybe he was being a bit irreverent, or maybe he was taking it too carelessly, and maybe he wasn't showing the respect he should have, but dead? Really? And then you read the next verse, in verse 8. David was angry because of the Lord's outburst against Uzzah. So he named that place Outburst Against Uzzah, as it is today. David was mad. His initial reaction to this was anger. How could God do this? I mean, here I am, I'm trying to do something good, and I'm trying to bring the Ark of the Covenant, and I'm trying to restore a place of worship, and I have all these good intentions, and, this was just an innocent little mistake, and, he didn't mean to touch it, and the oxen stumbled, and you can imagine all the justifying David was doing initially, and he's mad. This isn't fair. He's just downright angry with God. And we would do the same thing. We would sit and we'd question God all day long in an event like this. For all of our good intentions, for all of our good plans, for all of the programs we came up with, and you let us fall flat on our face. Why? I mean, we'd be quick to say, where were you, God, and why did you allow this to happen? We would. And that was David's initial reaction. But then, you see that? I want you to see, this is so big. At the beginning of verse 8, David was angry because of the Lord's outburst. The beginning of verse 9, David feared the Lord that day. I mean, do you just see that? That's why I don't like to just read through it too fast. We go from one verse to the next verse. David was mad at God. David feared God. It's when you go through these crazy things in life that maybe sometimes your initial reaction is you're going to be a little angry about it. You're going to think it's unjust. You're going to think it's unfair. But then all of a sudden in that moment, you're going, wait a minute, God is still God. And David in this moment, he backed up and he went, okay, I need to fear the Lord. I have no idea why this just happened. David backed up and said, okay, I don't get it. I thought God would have wanted me to bring back the ark. I'm not sure why this took place. I don't know why he killed Uzzah. I don't know. And can you imagine the personal responsibility David had to have felt in this moment? As their leader, as their king. This was his plan. He took all these men. He's the one making this big parade of this and praising the Lord. And now this has happened. And you can imagine everybody's afraid. And everybody's looking at him going, what have you gotten us into? And they're all questioning him. And I would imagine David was now feeling guilt because, okay, where did I go wrong? So there was that mix of emotion of one minute he's angry with God and the next minute he's fearing God because, okay, I don't know what I did wrong, but apparently God isn't going to let this happen. And David's afraid. And he said, how can the ark of the Lord ever come to me? He had no idea, this isn't working. I don't know why God is not allowing this, but it's not working. And in that moment, a couple of things are going on. David can't see his own guilt in this, the real guilt. I'm sure he's feeling guilty, but he can't see why. He can't see the reason. He can't see where he failed. He can't see where he went wrong. But he's also frustrated and angry and partially self-defending, and yet on the flip side saying, but I don't know why. God isn't going to let this happen. So, in verse 10, he was not willing to bring the ark of the Lord to the city of David. He said, nope, I don't know why God's mad. I don't know what he's doing. I'm not dealing with it, though. I'm not having anybody else die because of this thing. I'm sure that's what his thought process was I don't want anything to do with it. No. So it says he diverted it to the house of Obed-Edom of Gath. So here was someone nearby, probably a friend, somebody knew, maybe David knew personally, I'm not really sure, but here is this friend of someone's, and he said, let's take it to their house. Now this was more than likely, by all reasons to believe, a Levite. So it would be okay that it was in his home. He was of the Levitical tribe. But what is not said, okay? What is not said, if I go on to the next verse, it doesn't say this anywhere. But what was that day like? What was it like when they show up with this ark, and here's David, here's the king, and here's his men, and they're going, I don't want this. I don't know why. I don't know what God's doing, but he's mad. Now somebody's dead. We don't want it. Will you take it? Well, somebody's dead. Now you want it in my house. And yet we don't see any argument from Obed. Not at all. And I truly believe, and many others agree, that this was because Obed he knew the reverence that ark deserved. And he gladly said, yeah, leave it here. Just leave it here. I'll take it. He didn't shy away from it. And I can just imagine it's like, okay, they move, here it is, here it sits, and here goes David and his men. David probably the whole time going, what just went wrong? What just happened? What have I done? And yet I think that was important, and maybe a reminder for all of us that, okay, sometimes we make honest mistakes. We, with all of our excitement and energy, and we plunge forward when we make a mistake. Or sometimes we make the honest mistake of just staying in the rut of, we've always done this, and it wasn't wrong then. Why is it wrong now? But we realize we don't really see where we're wrong. But it's in that moment when God says, okay, I'm trying to get your attention. I'm trying to bring you back to me. It's important that we step away and start taking some time to look and reflect on what happened here. And I believe with everything in me, David spent some time doing that, of reflecting and talking to God and pouring out his heart to God. We know David did that a lot. And probably seeking God, why? Why did you do this? Where did I go wrong? How could you let this happen? But in the next verse it says, the ark of the Lord remained in his house, meaning in Obed-Edom's house, 3 months. So there were 3 months of David walking away and reflecting and looking back and talking to the Lord. 3 months of this time went on. And in that 3 months, the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and his whole family. I mean, the blessings that were poured on this guy's house were so much that in the next verse we start to see everybody's talking about it. Like there's rumor going on. You would have no idea how great things are going over there for old Obed and his family. I mean, ever since the ark showed up there, things have been great for him. And everyone's talking. And it says, it was reported to King David, the Lord has blessed Obed-Edom's family and all that belongs to him because of the ark. They all knew what it was from. They're like, listen, like things are going great at his house, and it's because of the ark. And it says, so David went and had the ark of God brought up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David with rejoicing. Let me stop and not rush, because it feels like these verses kind of just rush right through it and we don't think about it. But you can imagine that David gets word of this. And David's going, what? Okay, it's not the ark that's bringing bad upon us. It was our actions. It was what we did. He had had 3 months of sitting here talking this over with the Lord. And now he gets word that, listen, the ark is bringing nothing but blessing to Obed's house. I mean, everything's good there. And David realizes, okay, it was me. It was me. It's not whoever's in the presence of that thing. It was me. And now he's realizing that, okay, I need to try this again. And this time I need to do it God's way, not mine. Because my way, I just messed it up. And somebody had to die because I was leading them the wrong way. And we weren't doing this right. But now David, he hears the Lord's blessing and he goes, okay, now it's time for me to go try this again. He didn't give up. You know, sometimes we make mistakes and we're done. We're out. Satan just beats us down and says, you messed up. And we never get back up and mend that and go back and say, no, this time, I'm going to conquer this time because I'm going to do it this time God's way. We let our failure, our mistake, even unintentional, just keep us down forever. I mean, much longer than a 3-month time of reflection and giving it over to God, it's forever. And we let Satan just rub it in how much we've messed up. And sometimes it can be the smallest thing. David could have let this just be the thing that kept the Ark of the Covenant forever from Jerusalem. But instead, he probably in this time poured his heart out to God. And we're going to kind of see a little essence of that as we look over at the Psalms. But God built him back up and said, okay, now, go back and get it now. It's okay. So it says David went and he brought the ark up from Obed-Edom's house to the city of David. But look at the difference here. Look at the difference in David's approach. Because this time when David went back, we see a completely different heart, a completely different approach. Now, sure, the first time he was praising God, had quite a scene going on. This looked good, okay? And many could say this looked good. But now when we look at this one, let's kind of compare the differences. In verse 13, when those carrying the ark of the Lord advanced 6 steps. Now, do you hear that? When those carrying the ark, not pushing it on any cart, now they're carrying it the proper way. When they had taken 6 steps, they had not gotten very far. 6 steps. Like, you just read through that, you don't even catch it. They had not gone very far. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and they stopped. It's all the further they got. And it says, when they advanced 6 steps, David sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. David stopped and sacrificed to the Lord. David humbled himself before God and in recognition that, okay, Lord, you're allowing us a second chance. You're allowing us, a renewed way of doing this. You've allowed us to come back, and we want you to know that here we are, humble before you. Because what we're doing is about you. See, even with sometimes the best of intentions for the Lord, it becomes a little more about us than him. And, it can seem hard and it can seem unfair, but we have a God who loves us and wants to draw us back into right relationship with him. And you can see that he did that with David somewhere in that 3-month time period. Somewhere in that, amidst the anger and the fear and all of those different emotions David had going on about what just happened. God renewed and restored relationship with him. And now we see David approaching this so humble and so grateful and so different than the first time. So here they are, they're carrying it. He stopped 6 steps later and he sacrificed an ox and a fattened calf. And then in verse 14, David was dancing with all his might before the Lord, wearing a linen ephod. He and the whole house of Israel were bringing up the ark of the Lord with shouts and the sound of the ram's horn. This was now a whole different party going on. And interestingly, it says that David danced with all of his might. Okay? This was probably in some way that was a bit over the top, a bit exaggerated. And it says he was wearing a linen ephod. Now, that was a priestly garment. Okay? In this moment, David had laid aside his royal garments, had laid aside all these things that said he was king. And he put on more of a priestly garb, that this was something holy, this was something of God, separate from his kingship. And now in this moment, he's making it all about God, and he, with all of his might, is praising the Lord unashamed, completely unashamed. And following his example, all of the people traveling with him are doing the same thing. This was a leader who had turned around and had gone back and approached this a second time completely different. And now we see the people following him, trusting him once again, and all of them following his unashamed praise to the Lord. And that tells us that those of us who are in those positions of leadership, we should not be ashamed of how we praise God or what that scene looks like. That's how we should be leading, in the right way, in a way that's willing to be openly humble and praising and in right worship with the Lord. And lead that way. And we see David doing that. I wish the story ended there. I wish we could just end there on a good note, and God had restored David, and things were wonderful, and he was praising God, and the ark was now coming into the city, and God had done a wonderful thing. End of story. You've always got those negative, awful naysayers. You do. Because then suddenly now everybody's in, David's in right relationship with God, and God has renewed his joy and his gladness, and David's not sitting over here wallowing in his mistake anymore. God's lifted him back up and said, bring it home. This is a party. So I was studying at home, and I got so annoyed I got up and walked away. Isn't that terrible? I did. I was like, why? Every time something is going good and God is doing something, you got to have somebody just drag it back down. Just somebody has got to just be negative about and criticize everything. So here we go. So it says, they brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. So understand, there was no temple built yet. That was David's future vision, David's future plan, which we know that David was not allowed to. God said, no, I'll let your son Solomon do that. But they had a temporary tent ready for it, and David offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings in the Lord's presence. Oh, I am so sorry, I skipped the verse. See, I was so awful, I skipped it. I'm like, where'd it go? Verse 16. See, that's what happened after this happened. As the ark of the Lord was entering the city of David, Saul's daughter Michal, remember David's first wife, Michal? She looked down from the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. Here is his lovely wife, watching from a window and going, what does he think he's doing? Is he kidding me? He's making a fool of himself. I mean, where is his kingly robe? I mean, he's disgraced himself to that attire? I mean, she is just disgusted with her husband and criticizing. But oh, of course, she didn't say it out loud. She just thought it in her heart. And she's just annoyed. Well, good thing. David doesn't know this is happening. Yet. So David proceeds, and we just read, he brought the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that was pitched for it. And he offered burnt offerings and fellowship offerings in the Lord's presence. And when David had finished offering the burnt offering and the fellowship offerings, he blessed the people in the name of the Lord of armies. And he distributed a loaf of bread, a date cake, and a raisin cake to each one in the entire Israelite community, both men and women. And then all the people went home. David almost, in a sense, set himself up as a prophet. You know, he kind of stripped off the kingly robes and garments, and this was a thing of worship, a time of worship before God that David led. And here are all the people gathered, and he's offering them these cakes, and almost like, kind of like our communion today, you know, that we have. And all this is going on. And this has been a great time for David. David ought to be able to go in and rest and feel like, wow, God has done something good. But, you know, that critical one, they just can't help themselves. They eventually have to say something. I mean, they just got to tear down. So when David returned home to bless his household, Saul's daughter Michal came out to meet him. These were her words. "How the king of Israel honored himself today," she said. "He exposed himself today in the sight of the slave girls of his subjects, like a vulgar person would expose himself." She is just disgusted. And she's making these false accusations that, listen, it was like you're dancing with some kind of vulgar something. I don't even know what you were out there doing. I mean, where were your king's garments? Where was your royal robe? What in the world were you thinking? I mean, she's just disgusted. And David replied to Michal, "It was before the Lord who chose me over your father and his whole family to appoint me ruler over the Lord's people Israel. I will dance before the Lord, and I will dishonor myself and humble myself even more." He said, "How dare you question my intentions?" You see, in this moment, David was unashamed. David said, "I will do it again. I will continue to humble myself. I will dance before the Lord. I will dishonor myself." because it's about God. It's not about me. It's not about my honor. It's not about me being king. See, David had learned a lesson in those 3 months that had gone by. And David knew what this was, that God had now granted it to him, had granted him favor, and had allowed him to bring the Ark of the Covenant into the city of Jerusalem. David said, in essence, David said, I'm not here to please you, Michal. I'm here to please God. And I will forever continue to dance at his feet. I will forever dishonor myself, if that's what you want to call it. If you think I'm putting myself down, you're right, because I am building him up. It's about God. And when a leader recognizes the importance of making it about God, not about themselves, it is then, David was confident that when I do this, he said, however, by the slave girls you spoke about, you know those ones who you thought were sitting there looking at me thinking, wow, look at King David? He said, listen, by them, I will be honored. David was confident that if he kept himself in right place with God, that the people would respect him. The people would honor him because they'd realize it was about God, not about himself. And it's one of those things that we have to realize that if we will keep ourselves in proper place with the Lord, people will respect that. There are always going to be those Michals who will criticize our worship, who will say things about what we're doing. But we need to remain confident in the Lord that if we stay humble with him, he will show favor on us. And many will see that and respect that. So we can't let that one or two that just want to tear us down and drag us down be the voice that we hear. So you can tell David was a little bit defensive, but more this defense was in the God that he knew he could stand firm in, and he knew his actions were right. And this chapter ends with, and Saul's daughter Michal had no child to the day of her death. As soon as I read that verse, the instant verse that popped into my head is, vengeance is the Lord's. You know those naysayers, those people that just constantly have to tear down and criticize everything? Just let it go. God will deal with them. He will. And it may not be pretty, it may not be nice, but we have to realize that God doesn't stand well with those who tear down his children, those who want to destroy what they're doing, because we have a God who wants to build us up, to lift us up, and to fill us with joy. And so as we look at Psalms, just real quick, heavily as you look at all of this, and I could read the whole chapter, I'm not going to. But if you look in Psalms chapter 30, bits and pieces of this, some believe are more dedicated to, different aspects of the coming of the temple and so on. But everyone agrees that the last two verses have to deal with this very event in David's life. So in Psalms 30, in verse 11, it says, you turned my lament into dancing. You removed my sackcloth and clothed me with gladness, so that I can sing to you and not be silent. Lord my God, I will praise you forever. I loved those verses. You turned my lament into dancing. You took me from a place where I needed brought back into proper perspective. Maybe I needed disciplined a little bit. Maybe I needed stopped because my actions were wrong. And I was frustrated, and I was afraid, and I was sad, and I had all these emotions. I was grieving. And you turned that into dancing. You restored me. You didn't leave me there. You didn't continue to knock me down. You didn't continue to rub in my face. Instead, you built me back up. You put me back in right relationship, and you turned that place of lament into dancing. You've restored me to where you want me. He said, you removed my sackcloth. Now we know that sackcloth is something that they would put on if they were grieving the loss of something. That was a place of deep, deep grieving. And David said, it's like you take me from this place and you clothe me with gladness, with happiness, with joy. You didn't leave me wallowing in that place of sadness forever. He said, why? Did you do this so that I can sing to you and not be silent? Lord my God, I will praise you forever. When I look at these verses more than anything to close this up, I know that any time you're going through something, whether it's you've made a mistake, whether you've sinned, you've failed, or even if it's something that is really not of your doing, you're just in a dark place in your life, the loss of a loved one or just whatever it may be. When you stay in that place of grieving forever, when you're staying in that place of sorrow forever, that is not of God. It is Satan that just wants to continue to pull you down. I'm not saying you aren't going to grieve the loss of someone. You are, and that's good, and that's healthy. But it is Satan who just wants to take all of these things and constantly throw it back in our face and just keep us in that place. Our God wants to lift us up and restore our joy. When we've failed, when we've made mistakes, and we take them to him, he's not going to sit and rub it in our face and keep reminding us of what we did wrong. He sees our humble heart and he says, I forgive you. I forgive you. Now let's get busy again. Let's forget it. It's gone. That's God. So when you feel like you can't ever get past something, when you can't ever get past a mistake, know that's your enemy who wants to tear you down. Because your enemy wants to keep you in a place that you are not up praising your God for who he is. Because our God desires to restore us to a place of dancing, to a place of gladness, to a place of joy, so that we can sing praises of him forever. Let's close in prayer tonight. Lord, we thank you that you are a God who chooses to lift us up, that you want to be joy in our lives. You want to bring joy. You want to bring gladness. That you don't want us to be sad forever. I know there are times. There's a time to mourn and there's a time to rejoice. I get that, Lord. But I also know that it is not you who wants us to stay in that place forever, but that you want to lift us back up so that we can bring praise and honor to you. So that it can be a witness to those around us that we, your children, we are a happy people. We are a people full of joy. And that we are people that are not afraid to unashamedly praise you, to worship you, no matter what or how crazy it may seem. Pray, Lord, that we would take from this story and that we would apply it. Not just hear it and walk away, but that we would apply it to how we live our lives. And even in those times where maybe we get out of line, that like David, we would stop and reflect, and that you would restore that right relationship with you. I thank you for your word. Pray that you would take us from this place with your blessing. In your holy name I pray, amen.